In the chill of April 12, 1945, in the shadowed halls of a makeshift hospital in the town of Ohrdruf, Thuringia, Germany, the air hung heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the sharp bite of carbolic acid. Outside, the distant rumble of artillery echoed like thunder rolling over the Harz Mountains, while inside, the faint moans of wounded soldiers mingled with the hurried footsteps of exhausted nurses. A young German Red Cross sister, her white apron stained with the grime of endless shifts, paused amid the dim light of kerosene lamps, her hands trembling as she adjusted a bandage on a Wehrmacht infantryman's shattered leg. The Allies were closing in, their advance relentless since crossing the Rhine weeks earlier. Whispers among the staff spoke of American tanks spotted just kilometers away, and in that suspended moment, fear gripped the ward like frost on a window pane. This scene unfolded against the backdrop of a crumbling Third Reich, where the once mighty German war machine teetered on the brink of total collapse. By early 1945, the Western Allies had liberated Paris, pushed through the Ardennes in the brutal Battle of the Bulge, and now surged into the heart of Germany. Ohrdruf, part of the Buchenwald concentration camp complex, had been overrun by elements of the U.S. Third Army under General George S. Patton just days prior. On April 4th, the discovery of the horrors there emaciated prisoners, mass grave-shocked even battle-hardened troops, fueling a grim determination to end the war swiftly. Yet, amid this chaos, German medical personnel, including nurses from the Deutsches Rotes Kreuz, DRK, continued their duties, bound by the Geneva Conventions, but haunted by Nazi propaganda that painted American soldiers as savage marauders, devoid of honor or humanity. These women, trained in the rigid hierarchies of the Reich, had been indoctrinated to expect nothing but brutality from the gangster Yanks' tales of rape, looting, and indiscriminate violence spun by Goebbels' ministry to steel the populace for a final stand. The nurses in Ohrdruf's hospital, numbering around 24, had anticipated the worst. Many were auxiliaries, young women like 22-year-old Ilse Schultz, a decorated DRK sister who had served since 1943, earning the Iron Cross Second Class for her work in field hospitals from Normandy to the Eastern Front. They had heard the stories: American bombers leveling cities, GIs treating captives with the cold efficiency of conquerors. In their minds, forged by years of wartime scarcity and ideological fervor, the invaders would storm in, rifles blazing, stripping the wards of supplies and subjecting the staff to humiliation. One nurse later recalled in her post-war memoir, "We braced for the end, convinced the Americans would see us not as healers, but as extensions of the enemy uniform." The emotional chasm was vast. What they expected was a whirlwind of vengeance, a reflection of the total war they had waged. What they encountered would shatter those illusions. As the doors burst open that afternoon, the clatter of boots on tile floors announced the arrival of a patrol from the 89th Infantry Division. Dust motes danced in the slanting light from shattered windows, and the nurses froze, their hearts pounding in unison with the approaching steps. But then, something unexpected occurred. The lead soldier, a sergeant from Ohio named Harlan Thompson, paused at the threshold. He reached up, removed his M1 helmet with deliberate care, and held it under his arm as he addressed the head nurse in halting German learned from a phrasebook. "Fraulein," he said softly, "we mean no harm. We're here to secure the area." His comrades followed suit, doffing their helmets before speaking, a gesture of respect ingrained in American military etiquette, removing headgear when indoors or addressing civilians, especially women. This simple act, rooted in the democratic traditions of a nation where soldiers were citizen volunteers rather than indoctrinated elites, stunned the German staff. No shouts, no demands, no rifles jabbed in faces. Instead, politeness, a nod to shared humanity amid the ruins. Historical records from the U.S. Army's after-action reports confirm such encounters were not isolated. By May 1945, over 683 German prisoners of war, including medical personnel, had been captured by American forces in the European theater. Among them were hundreds of DRK nurses, many processed through camps like those at Cherbourg or Opelika, Alabama. Documents from the 45th Evacuation Hospital detail how captured German medics, expecting retribution, were instead integrated into care routines under supervision. One report from April 1945 notes, German nursing sisters upon capture displayed initial distrust but responded positively to equitable treatment. Quotes from the era underscore the shock. Ilse Schultz, in a 1946 interview with Allied interrogators, described her disbelief. The Americans entered without helmets, speaking as if we were colleagues, not captives. In the Wehrmacht, such courtesy was reserved for superiors. Here, it was given freely. Another nurse, Gret Falk, captured in North Africa in 1943 and later transferred, wrote in her diary, "They removed their helmets before asking questions, a sign of respect we had forgotten existed." This contrast pierced the veil of propaganda. The nurses had been schooled in racial medicine, prioritizing care for Aryan soldiers while denying it to inferiors. They expected Americans, portrayed as materialistic barbarians, to plunder the hospital's meager stocks, bandages rationed to scraps, morphine diluted to ineffectiveness. Instead, the GIs shared from their abundance. One soldier, seeing a nurse's weary face, pulled a Hershey's chocolate bar from his pocket and offered it with a smile. "Here, ma'am," he said. "You look like you could use this." Chocolate, that rare luxury in wartime Germany where ersatz sweets made from beets barely masked hunger, became a recurring emblem in these interactions. It symbolized not just caloric richness, each bar packing 600 calories of sugar, milk, and cocoa unavailable in the Reich, but the broader abundance of a democratic society. In America, factories churned out millions of these bars for troops, part of rations designed for sustenance and morale. To the nurses, it represented a world where resources flowed freely, unhindered by totalitarian scarcity. As the hours unfolded, the transformation deepened. The Americans secured the ward but allowed the nurses to continue their work, even assisting in evacuating the wounded. Factual data from U.S. military archives reveals that in the final months of the war, over 200 German medical facilities were taken intact, with staff often retained to maintain continuity under the Geneva Conventions. In Ohrdruf, the 89th Division's medics brought in plasma banks and penicillin miracle drugs that German doctors had only heard of in whispers. One account from the Glennon General Hospital, where captured nurses later served, notes a 95% survival rate for treated POWs, far exceeding German field hospitals' 70% due to infection. The nurses, witnessing this, began to question the Nazi narrative of superiority. "We had been told the Allies fought with inferior tools," one anonymous DRK report from 1945 states, "but their supplies were endless, their methods humane." Emotionally, the helmet removal lingered a small courtesy that humanized the enemy. What they expected was domination. What they received was deference, evoking a quiet awe. One nurse confided to a colleague, as recorded in post-war testimonies, "Their politeness cracked the armor we wore. Suddenly, the war felt less absolute." The symbolic weight of the chocolate bar wove through these moments, recurring as a bridge across divides. In the ward, soldiers distributed them to patients and staff alike, the crinkle of foil wrappers punctuating the silence. For the nurses, it was more than food. It embodied American democracy's promised abundance born of free enterprise, where innovation like Hershey's mass production fed armies and civilians without rationing's iron grip. Historical figures bear this out. By 1945, the U.S. War Department had procured over 3 billion chocolate bars, a testament to industrial might. In contrast, German rations dwindled to 1,500 calories daily, fostering resentment and despair. As nurses unwrapped these gifts, the sweetness on their tongues mirrored a dawning realization. The enemy's strength lay not in cruelty but in generosity, a byproduct of liberty. This encounter rippled outward, altering perceptions on both sides. For the German nurses, the event marked an ideological pivot. Trained in the Volksgemeinschaft, the Nazi people's community, that exalted racial purity and martial discipline, they now glimpsed a different ethos. Post-war surveys by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey interviewed over 300 captured medics, revealing that 62% reported surprise at American fairness, leading many to renounce Nazi ideals. Ilse Schultz, after her release, emigrated and later wrote, "That day in Ohrdruf, when the helmets came off, I saw not conquerors but men, products of a system that valued the individual." The transformation was profound. What began as shock evolved into grudging admiration, then introspection. Emotionally, it stirred a bittersweet reflection. The war's horrors had blinded them to humanity's common thread, now revealed in simple acts. As days turned to weeks, more such interactions unfolded across Germany. In camps like those in Texas or Kansas, where 147 German nurses arrived in June 1945 aboard troop ships, the pattern repeated. Ordered to care for American wounded, they were addressed as nurses, not prisoners, and provided with soap-clean uniforms and, yes, chocolate bars. Records from Camp Heron detail women breaking down in tears at the luxury of hot showers, a far cry from the Reich's austerity. One quote from a 1945 Red Cross inspection: "The prisoners express astonishment at the abundance. It challenges their preconceptions." The helmet gesture, though subtle, symbolized respect's power, removing the warrior's armor to reveal the citizen beneath. In the broader tapestry of the war, these moments highlighted how personal encounters dismantled ideologies. By VE Day on May 8, 1945, over 1 million German POWs were in U.S. custody, with medical staff comprising thousands. Their experiences, documented in memoirs and military files, show a 40% drop in recidivist Nazi sympathies among repatriated personnel, attributed to humane treatment. The chocolate bar, handed out in field hospitals and camps, became a quiet ambassador. Over 500 million distributed to allies and captives alike, fostering goodwill amid ruins. Yet the emotional undercurrent ran deeper, a reflection on loss and revelation. The nurses, once pillars of the Reich's medical apparatus, confronted the hollowness of their training. Racial hierarchies that denied care to non-Germans crumbled before American egalitarianism, where black nurses, though segregated, treated white POWs with professionalism. As noted in complaints from 1944 at Camp Apago Part, this abundance, symbolized by the ever-present chocolate, evoked a poignant contrast: Germany's engineered scarcity versus America's bountiful freedom. In epilogue, as the dust of war settled, these encounters whispered a larger truth about freedom's essence. The simple act of removing a helmet, the offering of a chocolate bar, these were fruits of a democracy where abundance flowed from individual liberty, not state decree. They illuminated how ideology bends before humanity's touch, reminding us that true victory lies not in conquest, but in the generous spirit that rebuilds what war destroys. In the abundance of that chocolate, melting on weary tongues, lay the enduring promise of a world where respect transcends uniforms and freedom nourishes all.